everybody joining us. By the way, this is something new and exciting for 2024. You have four fabulous people getting together to lift off topics in space. And it's exciting because we all come from different backgrounds. And we were drawn together this year to talk through conversations for the future, foundation for the future, on things that a lot of people maybe don't understand, but want a little more information, or maybe you do understand it, but you're not getting, as we like to say, the right stuff. And so I'm going to let everyone introduce ourselves, but this is something where we're all kind of in our homes, in our backgrounds. That's why we're just hanging out. We're inviting you to grab a cup of coffee, or maybe it's already afternoon and you want to grab your favorite iced tea, or for me, it's kombucha, because, this time of year, you have to make sure to stay healthy. But I think I'll let everyone else introduce themselves, and then we'll kind of get things going. So we'll let Anara start, because she's kind of the one who's spearheaded this really cool idea of kind of a talk show, but it's real stuff, real people, and getting you the facts.
Hey, it's Anara Tabir, the Galaxis gal, here with my new favorite crew on the launch pad for our new show, Liftoff. And I started with the space industry 16 years ago. My big focus has been, how can we make more entry points for the public into space? And this coming year, I'm excited to look forward to interviewing interesting people who've got amazing stories to tell, and may not have a physics degree, may have a physics degree, but we'll show you that anybody really can be part of this industry. You can have the wrong stuff and still be the right stuff. How about you, Ubaldo?
Yeah, I love that. By the way, we're going to talk about the wrong stuff a lot, I think. But yes, Ubaldo Siminetti. I am a technologist, entrepreneur, sales and marketing dude by background, and I never thought I could get into the space industry. I've got all these friends in the space industry. I've certainly loved the space industry since I can even remember, and I think we're all going to talk about where that love comes from. But for me, I just never thought, because I didn't have clearance, I wasn't an engineer, that I could never work in the space industry. And so not until even like maybe just 2-3 years ago. And so that's a big part of what I'm exploring, and what I'm trying to help people understand is that there's room for all of us. I love this shirt because it sort of represents that. I mean, and Frank White, so he wrote the Overview Effect. He's such a cool guy, but he always refers to Earth as a spaceship, and we're all astronauts on this spaceship. And that's what I believe. Like, we're already all astronauts, so we should all be contributing to moving over to the next spaceship or the next town in space, right? We should all have a voice in that. So I'm very excited to be here. I think this is the start of something that hopefully we could start to bring space into the mainstream conversation of life that's happening. It should be as prevalent as Starbucks. And so that's my goal anyway. What about you, Daniel?
Hi, I'm Daniel Tompkins. I'm a doctor of plant medicine, lifetime kind of plant geek. And I'm stumbled into this really as a space skeptic about 5 years ago, wondering how we could do large scale agriculture in space given all the constraints. And I've always been up for a challenge all of my life and all of my career, and this was definitely a prominent one. And going into kind of the origin, I think you either have it or not. It's interesting, across so many different disciplines, you either have this kind of deep thought of, oh my gosh, can we leave this rock, or can we not? For me, it kind of boiled down to the moment, you find out you're made out of stardust. I think when you're whatever age and you conceptualize that the elements that you're made out of are literally stardust, that either like changes like a deep part of your brain or it doesn't. And for me, that was it.
Oh, that's really interesting. I always forget about that. Man, that's another big part of the conversation. Well, I think we should, because Meredith, you introed us, but you didn't really tell us about you. And so I think
that's true.
Maybe let's start with you. I know, right?
Well, I'm so used to conducting the interviews. So
yeah.
If you don't know me, I'm Meredith Garfalo, aka Rocket Girl, which was something that I've gotten nicknames in my career. But I have been a member of the television community and broadcasting community for the last 15 years. I am a award-winning certified broadcast meteorologist and a space and science correspondent. I'm actually a scientist and a journalist put together, which is really fun. And, you know, it's funny because I never thought I would have added space to my correspondent title, but as we'll talk about kind of where we got our space bugs from, I'll explain that a little bit more. But, you know, it's funny, I've focused so much of my life on weather, but then now I've jumped into the space community. I moderate panels. I'm asked to do these really great interviews with top advisors for NASA, for members of the White House, for private space companies. And I have been moderating Foundation for the Future now for a few years. That's how Anara and I got connected. And so I'm really excited to do something like this because we've seen shows like The View and, you know, they're all on topics of life, but what if we could have a topic like this about life, but adding space in? And I'm sure there's a lot of people watching right now that are like, that's really cool. Plus no drama. I mean, I'm sure we'll have some little drama, but we don't want to have drama. We just want to be real people, just like everybody watching. And we're here to talk about space. And like we said, get the right stuff going.
I love that you're talking about weather. You know, space weather impacts everybody. It impacts our daily lives. Space weather can cause radio blackouts and satellite disruptions. And yet we don't see typical solar weather reports on television. Going back to what you and Aldo were both saying, you know, I think about the fact that we're on Spaceship Earth. We're all born astronauts. If you think about it, we're on this ship hurtling through space, never in the same place. And this space weather is impacting our daily lives. With those two things in mind, shouldn't we have a daily solar weather report?
Yeah.
And why don't we? What is this disconnect between the reality and how we perceive it? I'm really interested in this, that people seem to think there's Earth and then there's space way over there somewhere, and you can ignore it. It doesn't impact us. But really, it's part of our daily lives. So what would it take, do you think, to get a solar weather report on every news station every day and make it relevant to people?
I think it's definitely something that needs to be more of a talked about conversation. Like, we talk about daily weather because looking outside, it's sunny today. People need to know about that. But it's interesting that this topic came up because I literally just wrote an article for space.com about how now organizations like NOAA and NASA have teamed up and signed something that they want to commit to helping advance space weather forecasting. You know, you think about how we're advancing our satellites, like NOAA satellites with these weather, the GOES series. But now it's like getting that next level and focusing on space weather forecasting. Because, I mean, think about it, guys. We just talked to it the other day about the aurora and how everybody wanted to know if they can see it. And that made the news. So I agree. I think it needs to be something that's more talked about. And when people understand, like Anar was saying, more of how it impacts us here on Earth, it may not be every single day we have a solar storm, but there's a big sun cycle that's coming up. And I think it's education. And it's more people in my line of work saying, this is a great story, and going to their bosses like they pitch an everyday news story and saying, hey, this is a national story, but it's going to impact us here. Let's find a local expert. It's not hard to pitch the story, but it has to be where one network is doing it, and then the next network catches on. I know it sounds silly in a way, but let's think about social media. Trending stories, something that's popular, then everybody else is sharing it. So I think it's getting that one organization or that one well-known person to sit down and say, let's do a story on this. So I hope when I share my space.com story, some of the networks pick it up.
Well, I think you should do it. I mean, we
Yes.
have this show Liftoff starting. Like, I think it's a segment that you do, like space weather with Meredith, for, you know, like 5 minutes, and just every month.
I second that for sure.
The
Let's just
Rocket
do it.
Girl Report. How about that?
Yes, yeah,
Ooh,
even
yes.
perfect.
Okay, a thing has been born here.
Oh, I love it, because like so kind of getting into where space came from. So you were telling me your mom was in, first of all, I've never heard of what was it? You said a tornado, what'd you call it?
A tornado outbreak. It was actually
Outbreak,
for
yeah.
those in the 70s. It was called the super outbreak of 1974. And there was a historic number of tornadoes with the storm system that came through that unfortunately killed people, but also just was back to back. And this is back in the day before we had advanced warning systems. And so
Yeah.
for my mom, she literally saw the tornado form above the house across the street, had
Oh
to get
my
her friends in the house to get into the basement. The tornado, thank God, went over the house and landed in the backyard. Didn't touch their house, but every other street almost on the entire neighborhood was wiped out. And she saw the tornado out the basement window. And I have chills when I tell this story
Yeah.
because that for me was my why I got into TV broadcasting for weather, because I wanted to help people. I wanted to tell stories and warn people. And so that's what kind of got me into watching the local stations. I was telling Ubalo earlier that I knew I was going to be on TV because my great uncle Stan in a family video was like, that girl's going to be on TV someday. Because I was always singing and dancing and doing stupid stuff in front of the camera. But it's funny how there's stuff in our childhood that moves us forward into where we are today. And I know at least one of you has a childhood story of space, and that's why it's gotten you so passionate over the years.
Yeah. Yeah. Daniel, what was yours? I mean, you know, because you come at it through the earth in a sense, right? But what was your connection?
Um, is it possible? I think I've always been
Yeah.
Doctor of Plant Medicine is a practicing degree of plant pathology, soil and water science, entomology, pretty much everything that can go wrong in agricultural systems. I've done a lot of so similar to what veterinary medicine is for animals, but for plants, and it touches on a lot of different biology. So what got me into it was that challenge: is it a pure system? You know, is it void of these problems? You know, can we solve for these challenges? Or you know, how do we have an integrated solution that self balances, that self regulates? It was really a fascinating kind of, you know, what do we take from Earth? You know, and what can we leave behind, and what's just going to come with us regardless? Kind of from the pathologist standpoint, from a environmental systems side of things, it was just a fascinating context. And you know, truly, you know, if you can survive, if you can produce large scale agricultural systems in space, and then we can do that pretty much anywhere on Earth. That was a fascinating thing. As I see these really large challenges in food production systems that really have a lot of touch points, and really it's just, and whether we ever go to space or not, we're gonna have to solve for these anyways. And it looks a lot like going to space. You know, how do you do things really in a sustainable way? So yeah, it's a lot of different layers to it for sure. But going back to, I think, you know, I just always had that space bug. I mean, and truly, it was, you know, SpaceX, you know, that catalyzed that idea. Was, you know, it started that conversation. It was sitting around in a hacker space and talking about, oh, are we really going to colonize Mars? How, you know, how is this possible? And taking these kind of grand ideas and actually putting them into context, and actually thinking of them as a real thing.
What I love about this is that oftentimes people have these biases towards, you know, what a spacer is. And it's like, you like rockets, but here you come along from Earth and this big system solve kind of mentality. I love whenever you and I first had our big first meeting, like really dug in, you talked about the hidden space program, and you talked about, you know, the fact that people were basically working on all the hardware and looking at all the rockets, but how are they going to eat? And it was such a simple but profound moment for me. And I'm like, oh my God, duh. Like, we need food, and we have to be able to produce food, and we can't just keep shipping. And I think a lot of times we think about space like backyard camping. You know, like, we'll go to the moon and we'll have all this hardware, and, you know, mom will just send some sandwiches up for us when we need them. But really, that's no way to do it, especially because it's so hard to get there. We need to produce things in situ. And those things need to do things for us. Can you talk more about that mentality that you brought to the table of, like, you can't just be one thing, you've got to also produce more?
Yeah, I think it needs to be a reproducible methodology, you know, not just the $26 million space toilet, you know, but actual hardware that can be reproduced. I think
It
that's
better be a
a key.
bidet at least. I'm just saying, for that much money.
Seriously, here.
And and if it's reproducible, then then you kind of outpace entropy, right? At your core, you're talking about how do you outpace entropy, you know, from a thermodynamic standpoint. But in a simpler way, it's just, how do you have an architecture that you can expand in situ, as you described. And it's often been, you know, polarized around, this is the most fringe, useless element when it's really simple. It's learning how to thrive independent of Earth's natural resources. And that has such a bigger audience. And there are so many people, like you said, I think there is, as I've looked into all these interconnected systems to, really a large agricultural system, there's people working on these, but they have no idea it coincides with space, let alone the most, fringe quote unquote thing, space settlement. So both from a political standpoint and a scientific endeavor, I think there is a massive hidden space community that could be tapped on in specifically in regards to space settlement that they don't even know they're solving for, that they don't even know they're a part of.
I love
Mm.
the cross-pollination of basically you're saying there's a ton of companies out there that are terrestrially focused, but are unknowingly solving things that we need solved for space. And then on the flip side, we can very like consciously build for space, but then apply that to Earth. So if we can build a sustainable closed loop system in space, we can do that in the harshest areas of the Earth. So really, it's like the two are solving for each other. I like that theme because it goes back to the, space is not over there, Earth's not over here. It's one big integrated system. And when we ignore these connections, we're missing all kinds of packets of solves.
And
Waldo, I'd love to talk. Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, well, I was just going to reply. Like, I think a lot of that just comes from just a lack of awareness, right? I don't know. I wouldn't say there's intention necessarily. I mean, I think some people probably directly ignore the fact, maybe because it's like a money issue, right? Because money drives everything. But but I think for the most part, most people just aren't aware that what they're doing could absolutely apply. And I think that's where the mainstream, this mission of ours, right, to make space mainstream becomes really important, because if I can sit here in my daily job and just automatically think, oh, well, this could also apply on the moon, right? That's where we need to get to as a planet, because gosh, I think then it just, like, things could just exponentially grow in terms of possibilities and opportunities. And fine, you want to make money? Great. Like, space is a great place if you want to make money.
Right.
Every company should have a space department, I think.
A space strategy. We talk about
Yeah.
how, companies needed an internet strategy. Now we're getting to the point where they may need a crypto strategy. But really, yeah, everyone should have a space strategy. We see that with what happened with Axiom. They brought on Prada and Adidas, and they have
Yes.
contracts with them. And these are companies that are sending signals out to the public and out to the industry saying, we're ready. This is profitable. This is something we want to be involved in. And I think more and more you do see that. In the early days, it was, with marketing, they were trying to figure out how to attach themselves to space. And you saw a lot of fumbling, like we could send shoes to the moon, we could send perfume to the moon. It was always like, let's dump junk on the moon.
Yeah.
And a lot of us were like, please don't just turn it into a junkyard. That's not good marketing. But now they're finding a way to have more meaningful connection to the space industry. And that's important because they don't need to do that unless they need to do that. And it seems like they do. So we're heading into this future very quickly of space being connected to every facet of what we do every day.
Yep.
I have to make a comment because 10 years ago, when I was getting into this business, I remember when climate change stories just started with the mainstream media. Look how many years it took for now every single television network and even the White House and our government to focus on climate change initiatives. So it's clearly something I feel like I've seen it before with getting into the news, and now everybody's talking about it. But it takes time, but it also takes people like us, or for myself, for example, in the media, to say, we got to keep pitching these stories. Like, this needs to start. I was chair of the Station Scientist Committee for the American Meteorological Society. And so what that is it's a bunch of TV Mets that meet once a month, and we find out ways that we can work these science. We're like the station scientists, and how we can work stories on now space and science and STEAM into the newscasts. We're taking responsibility as scientists to get these stories out there. And it's interesting because we're so big on climate change, but now, since I was president, or whatever they called me, chair, whatever, still,
Yeah.
the
Our
committee.
Royal Majesty.
Oh, yeah.
I try. it's interesting because since my appointment, we've started to work space now, and a couple other meteorologists who are really into space are now trying to get more space stuff at the broadcasting conferences. And so it's something that's a work in progress. But if we continue to push like we did with the topic of climate change and inform people, and like we said, get the right information out there instead of these, I don't want to create crazy people, but bozos that post stuff that they don't have no facts on. But it's clickbait because, ooh, this is fancy. I'm going to share this. I mean, people need to be responsible with their posting, but people that have that response, like with great power comes great responsibility. And so for people in the media, for people with these power positions, they got to start getting these stories out there and start writing more about it, but doing the fact checking and making sure, like our whole topic is, you got the right stuff going out to people, because the wrong stuff is, it's like sci-fi. People draw on it, but there's too much of that. And there's too many people, even people in this business, that are sharing it just to get likes or the popularity of social media.
By the way,
Yeah,
side note,
Go ahead, Wanda.
I would love to be called crazy and not a bozo. I think I prefer crazy to bozo. Just FYI. So if you guys are like,
Okay.
I'm like, because bozo to me is
I
like,
watched Bozo the Clown
but I
growing
like
up.
it. Yeah, right.
Crazy Ubaldo.
Crazy. All right. By the way, I do need a nickname like you two have. I think Daniel and I need space names. So something we'll have to come up with over the course of the first season.
For Daniel, I think it should be like the Mighty Green Space Thumb.
Yeah, something with plants. Like,
Right?
Yeah, totally.
something with plants.
Plants, man.
Yeah.
We'll come up with them as we go. I'm glad you talked about this, Meredith. You're talking, I mean, we can talk about like flat earthers, for instance. Although I miss the Hollow Earth crew. I mean, those are some great conspiracy theorists, They were always planning this expedition to Antarctica to figure out how to get into the Hollow Earth, and never quite really materialized, but bless them, they gave it their best. But flat earthers and alien conspiracists and people along these lines, and the moon hoax people, on one side, obviously, but on the other side, I think what's happening is that they don't feel engaged. They don't feel like they had access. And that's why it's gaining such traction, because it's one of these things where we haven't been on the messaging. We haven't been able to open the doors and show people that it's there for them. And I think they became the orphans of the science community. So part of it is on us. And I think what happens is science has kind of held itself up in this really high ivory tower to some extent, out of reach. And people were like, okay, I tried, I can't get to it. What's available? And the flat earthers were like, come on over. We've got sandwiches and you can join us, and no big deal. Everyone's welcome to the party. And it is that accessibility, I think, that makes the huge difference, because, they can get there, they can be part of it, they can use sciencey terms. So I think we need to figure out how to de-orphan these groups of people and give them access to our community, make room for them. And if we do that, then, we're going to have a big change there. But I like to go into those communities, and I'll say it right now on camera. I use a fake profile. I go into alien conspiracy communities on Facebook, huge groups. Yes, because what I find is they're massive, they're extremely active, they're very passionate. Yeah. And what I do is I drop science into those groups. Ooh. So when I do, they'll still have their conversations. I'm not going to counter the things I know are wrong. And I just drop science into those groups and they gobble it up. And I work to make it as accessible as possible. So I'm showing that there is a way to engage them with the actual science. And I think also, when we look at when NASA says on Friday, we have a big announcement all week. And they do this. They said on Friday, they give you the information on Monday. They want to create that buzz. The whole weekend, the entire public's like, aliens, it's aliens. And when they come back and they say, we found more water on the moon, the public's like, so what? So they need something pizzazzy. They're hungry for it. So I think we can make things more pizzazzy for them. We can explain to them, like, I think we need to do a better job of explaining why that water is so exciting. The fact that we can make rocket fuel on the moon, and that rocket fuel is going to allow us to create shipyards on the moon, which is going to be their forward base to Mars, to create a whole new civilization. Like, we can sell it in a way that they do on Monday when NASA says there's water on the moon. They're all like, yes, so it's on us, I think, to get the messaging right. And that's why I think it's so important with the four of us that we reach the public in ways that gives them that access point.
Right. I mean, people want to know. Oh, go ahead, Daniel.
And also acknowledge some of the real challenges and different thoughts around some of these ideas. It's interesting that you drew the climate change parallel, because I think there's more space skeptics than there are believers. I think when climate change kind of came about, there was Al Gore's, remind me again what Al Gore's?
And
He created the
truth.
internet.
Inconvenient truth.
Inconvenient truth.
Inconvenient truth.
The inconvenient truth came out and it was split really 50-50, right? And then as it progressed, there was the skeptics, there was the this is corruption, that these aren't real solutions, and all of those kind of things did play out over 15 years or not or whatnot. I see a lot of greenwashing, from a scientific end on some of these things. And on the space side, you see more books that come out and articles that come out saying, "Oh, this is going to be way too hard, and we're never going to be able to do it." When really we never tried, and really there are not a lot of people trying in this arena at all. Just here on Earth, there's 8 billion people. Not a single person out of all 8 billion lives independent of Earth's natural resources, where you could unplug from Earth's ecosystem and be able to breathe and drink water and eat food and have your waste treated. Not There's not a single system that exists like that, but it's not to say we can't create one, and we really haven't tried much. So it's interesting, in that spectrum of never going to happen is absolutely going to happen, because in 150 years we're going to have to solve for all these same challenges. So it's this whole spectrum of time scale and perspectives, and that really there's a lot of headwind, I think, and it's a smaller crowd that ultimately is currently has the spotlight. But again, I think there's a broader hidden community that can really, they are the experts in these different areas. How do we survive on Earth in 150 years? Looks a lot like space settlement.
I think people like to know, how is this going to impact me? And when I'm always writing my stories, I try to think about that. People, it's all about them. It's all about their life. So, okay, well, how can we tell these stories about what's going on in space that impacts the individual here on Earth? For example, I did a story once about how they're working on curing cancer in space. Well, then you talk to a cancer research center here on Earth, and there's people that have been touched, their lives have been touched by cancer, and they're like, wow, that is cool, because my dad passed from cancer, and my dad actually did. And to know that there's something like that, it draws your interest. So it's finding those ways where we make it not seeming like a sci-fi movie we're watching, but something that is going to impact us. And whether it's something as simple as plants or something as what's going on in space, I think we need to find those ways to connect the two, so people feel like we're talking exactly to them, and how it's like eating or drinking every day.
I love that. It's first of all, like the cancer thing, or they're developing insulin that's 100% effective in space because the crystalline structures are perfect, as opposed to here on Earth, where gravity is a problem a lot of times, right? And so you only get about 80% effectiveness when you develop it here on Earth. So I think absolutely, like, how do things like that directly connect to billions of people who are suffering from those types of things, even people with disabilities who could have a better life in space because of less gravity, right? Like, that's sort of fascinating to think about, something I'd never thought about until I talked to someone about that, who's advocating for people with disabilities, who she refers to as having hyper abilities in space, who can do things that we can't, right? But also could have a better life. And then, Daniel, I wanted to say something about, the whole thing about space is hard. I see so many people say that, even people in the industry. And this is where I think space has a marketing problem, because yes, it's hard, but when you say it, it turns everybody off, right? Well, I don't even want to try. Why would I even try if it's that hard? We have to change that mentality, that perception, because it's not that it's hard. It's just a new challenge. To your point, it's just something new that we have to try to solve, and we have to try to solve it.
I'm glad you say that, because Tim Chrisman, founder of Foundation for the Future, he has this amazing saying I love, and it's I've seen it kind of divide a room and get people talking, and it's, let's make space boring. And I love that mentality, because right now it seems like space, and like, even when we talk about who is an astronaut, right? Space is this huge objective, and it's the mission. It's like, we got to figure out space. We got to get to space. Just getting to space is such a big mission that you get a special name for getting there and working there. And people fight over, if you've gotten to the Kármán line and come back down after a minute, you're not an astronaut, because all you did was go up there for a second. You're just a passenger. You're just a tourist. But then other people are like, no, space is so hard. The space is so difficult. They're definitely astronauts. So we go back and forth. And all of that is because space is hard, right?
Yeah.
I think the goal needs to be to make space so easy that, you know, tiny children and elderly people and everyday workers go to the moon on a regular basis. They don't think anything about it. They jump on their passenger shuttle and they don't know how it works. They just get there. And that's what we need to get to, is where space is no longer an objective. It kind of disappears. In the same way that Google's talking about the internet disappearing, space needs to disappear. And we just kind of take it for granted in the future. And I think that's the best outcome. And then we can talk about, you know, what's hard is like building civilization, for instance, rebuilding civilization, figuring out how things are going to work. But right now it is, I agree with you. I think the idea is just so astronomical that the average person can't attach themselves to it.
Yeah.
But the four of us did.
I think of, I
Yeah.
was thinking of the quote from A League of Their Own, if you've ever seen that movie, and Tom Hanks's character
Love that
goes,
movie.
"It's the hard that makes it great." And that was just going
Yeah.
through my head. So sorry to
Oh
interrupt, but
my
I just
gosh,
thought
I
of, I'm a
love
quote
this.
person. So I
That
was like, that's
is.
a great, powerful quote.
And to make it seem a little easier, it's only 1.1%. Is human population on Earth grows at 1.1% on an annualized basis currently. So how do you have
Yeah.
a system that produces air, food, water? How do you have a system that grows at 1.1% using off of Earth and independent of Earth? It's not as challenging, I think, as most people think, or it's not as demanding as I think most people think it will be.
Now,
Well,
I
and I
want to go
think.
back to, go ahead, Albaldo.
Oh no, go ahead.
I want to
I
go
keep
back
jumping in.
to, we've talked a little bit about our childhoods, but I'd like to dig in a little bit more. Meredith, can I start with you? You talked
Yeah.
about the tornado, and I think it's
Right.
phenomenal. You know, we hear this often from people who get into industries, you know, something impacted their lives, their families' lives, and they set about to be the answer to that, to be the solution to that. But can you dig in more about your process? So this tornado happened, you had this inspiring moment, and then how did you go from there? Like, what was your journey like to get into this industry? So not just obviously professional media, but then, you know, you've obviously from day one, you've been instilling science wherever you can. So talk about your journey a little bit.
Sure. And I think to tie in what we're doing here today, I got bitten by the space bug a lot later in life. So I can kind of talk about too how it doesn't have to be your childhood dream. You can still have your childhood dream and have another dream as well. So yeah, I just I grew up, I was watching, remember the NOAA videos back in the day? I bought them all, or Santa brought me them on tornadoes, and I just started really studying it. And it was something that made me definitely stand out in school. Kids thought I was weird and they made fun of me because I was so excited about something like science. And so, I did have my challenges and my adversity. Kids were bullying to me about it because I was different and I had these ideas, which I feel like ties well into the space industry because people have all these new ideas and, sometimes people don't believe in them. But I've learned that the people who believe in you, that it has to start with you believing in yourself. And that did take me a lot of years and therapy and all that good stuff. But now looking back, it was the teachers, it was people I trusted, family that supported me in this. And over the years, I continued to learn about the science. And then I went to school. I have a Bachelor of Science in Meteorology and minors in TV and radio broadcasting. They didn't have a lot of space courses. And the astronomy course, back then I probably wouldn't have been interested in. Now I think it's probably a lot cooler because I was so like mindset focused on one thing because that was my childhood dream. That was what I wanted to accomplish. And then, I just got my first TV job a few weeks out of college in a real small rural town in Southeast Ohio. And I didn't just stay in one spot. I mean, I traveled all over the country. I have worked in TV markets in South Dakota, California, Florida, Ohio, Colorado. And then my ultimate goal was to work for New York City. I mean, the concrete jungle dreams are made of, like, that was my dream. And it took me 13 years to get there when I was like, by 30, I'm going to be in there. So I guess it's sometimes just really appreciating the ride and knowing that things line up and happen for a reason. But tying into space, in 2017, which is when I say Rocket Girl began. And if you see me with my Rocket Girl shirt, I have established in 2017 because I covered my first science and space story on the NOAA GOES satellite program. And I was with the National Weather Service office in Los Angeles, and GOES-R had already been up. So that was the first one, Goes East. So then Goes S, which was going to become Goes West, was getting ready and made and everything. And I started talking to fellow meteorologists that were getting the pilot program for this data and finding out how advanced technology through satellites in space was helping with our weather forecasting. And before that, I hadn't heard anything about it. I didn't know anything that there were these satellites that were helping because it was so focused and trained on things here on Earth. So once I did a story on that, people loved it and our community was so excited. And then I tried to think, okay, well, what other kind of stories can I do? So I went up to Vandenberg Space Force Base and I interviewed the meteorologists behind the scenes on launch weather forecasting. And I realized nobody's telling these stories, or if they are, they're one national story and done. So then I just started getting in and making contacts with NASA and through NOAA and through other organizations. And I got picked to be one of the only TV media in the country to fly with the Goes S or Goes West satellite from Denver, where it was made at Lockheed Martin, to Florida before launch. And I did a whole behind the scenes. I mean, I still have chills. I was in the C5M Super Galaxy flying with the military with this huge satellite. Like I'm on the same like plane as a satellite. That is so big. You look at it and you're just blown away. But something turned in me to realize that I'm a great scientist and I'm really good at being a meteorologist, but I'm also a really good storyteller. And as a scientist, I get a whole different view from the public and from colleagues that I can sit down with, say, a scientist from NASA, and they could tell me all the science jargon and things that the general public wouldn't understand. But with a scientist's brain, I could turn around and write a story that, like I said, you can find that personal connection to. And from there, I just started getting more and more well known. I started networking, and then I got asked to moderate a panel at the Space Symposium. And then other people heard about me, and I was moderating panels for satellite. And then I met Tim Chrisman, and they wanted me to get involved with Foundation for the Future. And so I realized I had almost a second destiny that stems from my first career to be a science and space communicator. And now I'm looking back and it's like, it's funny because sometimes you start in one place and then it's so funny to see where life takes you. And now I'm really fine tuning and shifting my career to focus on both science and space storytelling because there's not enough of it being done. And I'm really hoping I can inspire the next generation because I take all my stories personally. And now I do science talks, I do school talks, I do inspirational, motivational talks. And I try to get on these panels as a moderator or a panelist because, like we're doing this, it starts with choosing to make a difference. And so now I've been bit by the space bug and I can't get enough of it. So I think people that are like, well, I don't know if I can do that. Like, go into your inner passions and know that you can have a second career or a second start in your life. And because we never know how many days we have here on Earth, but we know that when something comes to us and we feel it in our souls, we just have to go for it. So that's my sappy story.
I love that. You
I
know,
love it.
people would see your first great victory, your first great mountain peak of professional media as a lifelong achievement, and you're good. Like you've done it, you've got to the top. But for you, it's like you climbed up and you were like, oh, look at that peak. And you kept going. So it's I think it's really common in this industry with space where we are driven people. You know, we're not the average, people who seek comfort. I think we're actively seeking discomfort and growth. And that's something that does set the space industry apart, no matter how we come in. Daniel, can you talk a little bit about your journey? Because there's so much more for me to dig in with you, but I know you've conquered several peaks and you're still going.
Woohoo!
Absolutely. So for me, I was nature boy, like in the neighborhood. It was 12 boys all in our neighborhood in suburban Connecticut. And we were fortunate to be surrounded by 800 acres of area that we didn't get kicked out of, I'd say. So I explored every inch of it and a lot of different ecosystems. But for me, it was my physical playground. Nature was my physical playground. It was my petri dish between gardening, planting the vegetable garden in the backyard with my dad every year, to out there in nature. It was absolutely my scientific petri dish. And then it was also my business plan. I was the neighborhood landscaper. I was hiring kids in my neighborhood at like age 12. Like I think even younger than that. I mean, I had my bike hooked up to my self-made wooden cart that I used to go around And I put out flyers, like that was the first thing I typed up in Word was like $20 to clear your leaves and gutters and everything else. And I just put them all out in everyone's mailboxes, and I got a huge response. I mean, we had what was it, answering machine, right, back in the day,
Yes.
and like we had like
Little
12
beeper.
messages,
Yeah.
and my mom's like, "Who are all these people calling for landscaping work?" I don't know, but I can't do them all, so I'm hiring my
mean,
friends to do half of them. So
that's
um,
hilarious. $20 is
I
a
was
good deal, by the way. It's a great
Oh
deal.
yeah,
Mm.
I hire you.
especially when you're paying your friends like $2 to do it. It was between the paper route, it was first the paper route that gave me a little bit of
Oh,
traction, and then hey, I can put my own piece of paper in those mailboxes and make money.
yeah.
So for me,
Space
nature
boss.
was, but going back to the storyteller, that was really interesting because I had all these stories from out in nature and understanding plants and ecosystems. So whether it was someone in the neighborhood who said, "Hey, why is this dying?" or "Hey, what should I put in here instead?" or whatnot, it was the story of that individual plant. It was the story of that ecosystem, that light environment, soil, water, and I took that into my first high school job, which was working in a landscape nursery where it was up a level. It was people spending tens of thousands of dollars on landscaping and such and picking out a lot of stuff. And I was right there in sales.
Hmm.
So it was really telling, asking them about the story that they want their landscape to play out and how that all works and the story of the individual plants that were going into those landscapes. And then college, and it was business and medical, but both my parents were in the medical profession. And I took this total, I was 5 generations removed from the field, from the farm. And I followed my passion in horticulture and environmental design. I said, wow, this is a really interesting thing that I just enjoy loving. Yeah, everyone would come in and they'd say, oh my gosh, you have the best job in the world. And I was 17, 18. And I was like, well, why am I going to leave this? Like all these other people will come pouring over from corporate offices and stuff, and they say I have the best job ever. Like what? Yeah. And I've never worked in an office ever. I
Wow.
You're lucky.
So
continued
Earth
that
is your
on.
office, not just your spaceship. I like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, truly. So then I went on to undergrad, and then the housing bubble popped, and I said grad school. Okay, so the whole landscaping nursery industry was going down with the housing market. I said, if they're going to pay me to learn more about plant pathology, all these things that we touched on a little bit in
Hmm.
undergrad, but I saw just how deep the layers were to these in the commercial setting as well, working for a seed company. And I was like, wow, these are really tough things, and they're dynamic. It's we're always getting some new insect in, some new disease in. So I went down to the University of Florida and did exactly that. I mean, it's really like 4 or 5 masters in one, or really like 3 PhDs in one, and a
Okay,
lot
you're
of
the
practicing.
professor. That's like your nickname. If we were on Gilligan's Island, Daniel, you're the professor.
Ooh, I love it.
But
Yes.
but it was applied practicing because instead of working on one little isolated system, it was really a systems engineering approach.
Hmm.
So that's what I loved about it was it wasn't just, incrementally increasing basic research in one avenue. It was, oh my gosh, all these things are interconnected. They're so um so yeah, it was a fascinating area of study and practicing. And then I was international, going around to, international farms, truly multinational farms,
Hmm.
with several companies, and saw a whole global perspective. And also the common both skill set of kind of the plant geeks that were often in these, regardless of what country you were in and who you were talking to, in their production system. They had that hidden plant geek, usually typically as part of them, where it was a deep passion. And yeah, it was, and then as you bring this story into space, how do you, people want to know what the future of food looks like. I'm always getting, and I've had large scale organic production, large scale industrial production. I've seen the spectrum, genetic engineering, all these hot topics. But ultimately, it's like 1% of the population that works in agriculture. It's almost the efficiency of the system
Hmm.
really makes it
Interesting.
hard for messaging. Um, so I'm always, and then now I'm the storyteller for, these very complex systems, and, and what the future of them look like. Just earth-based agriculture. So interesting, the storyteller perspective that often comes back is, hey, I'm not just a spokesperson for myself or my company. It's really like an industry that when people field me questions, even at NASA events, people will bring up some random NPR topic about citrus greening or something like that, and I could And I could talk for 20 minutes in a fascinating way about a citrus disease, right? And like it's really interesting seeing you know, the broad, I mean, everyone eats, right? The broad interest in where their how their food is produced and what that all looks like. And there's a lot of knowns, there's a lot of unknowns, and it's a fascinating journey.
You know, there's this thing that happened when you and I first had our like 2 hour dig in when we first really connected. You kind of you brought a whole new world into my lap that I never thought about, that I wasn't really, it wasn't on my radar. And my first response was like, no, this isn't relevant to me. This is a distraction. I can't comprehend this. And I kind of went away and I sat with it for a while, and then it just started unlocking in my head, and I went, oh my God. You know, I realized this is so relevant, and it's probably one of the most pivotal things. You know, food is not, I learned to think a little bit differently about food, because it was always just kind of like, we need it, we consume it, it creates energy. But really, you showed me an entire system of food does all these other things that you don't realize, and it's part of an entire system that is integrated and needs to be represented in space. And when I got it, I was just like, you know, call Daniel back. Like, oh my God, we need to get this on. And I realized that we're missing all kinds of gaps in space, but we don't even know what those gaps are. So one of the things I hope we can dig into with our show are those gaps. And I think the only way to get to those is to look at this thing, you know, systemically, and think about civilizationally, you know, what that future human life in space looks like, and then work backwards and figure out like where are all these different pieces that we're missing. Because I feel like,
What does that green loop look like? And there are tons. It's way more than one specific piece of the puzzle. It's a massive thing. And then how does that differ from other, you know, synthetic production of food? Is now you have cellular based, you have, you know, cold fusion coming online, artificial photosynthesis. What are the, you know, spaces that have been very energy and robots focused, and biology's been this massive, you know, okay, where does that fit in? Do we bring it with us? Do we leave it behind? It's a big decision point, I think.
for sure. And I think we had this problem where, you know, space kind of went to the back burner. You know, we were hitching rides with the Russians. We went from, you know, not because it's easy, because it's hard. We're going to put someone on the moon. We're going to do these great things. And, you know, everyone dreamed with the Apollo era. It was like a national myth that became a global human myth. And it was bigger than anything. And we made these astronauts, you know, gods, basically. But then from that to, you know, the early modern era, where we're hitching rides with Russians and the public doesn't have a clue what's going on. They don't care about launches. And then suddenly, boom, it exploded. You know, I think SpaceX was a huge part of that. There was this reusability factor, and he was blowing rockets up on the launch pad. It was a rock star kind of thing. And people started getting invested into it. But I think what happened was space went boom and started going rapid speed. And we really hadn't caught up on the messaging. We really hadn't figured out all the pieces. So we were like, wait, we're not ready, you know? And I think that's why we've missed a lot of these gaps, because it wasn't like we meticulously planned, like, okay, here are the things we need to make this complete. It was more like, oh my gosh, here comes a bunch of reusable rockets. Do something quick. So I think we do need that retrospective. We need that reflective time to figure out like what's missing. And that way, when all these amazing new entrepreneurs, I talk to people who are coming into this industry from so many other industries. I mean, we have at least 3 people in this call, I think, that did not start off in space. And I've met people from the oil industry, from the automotive industry, at the highest executive levels, from tech, from social media, who were very comfortable making large digits, and they've chosen to come over into space because they see it heating up. So I'd like to talk more about that with you, Ubaldo, because you didn't come from space originally, and you're doing some pretty amazing stuff. Can you talk about your journey, kind of how you got started and why you transitioned over?
Yeah. The year was 1981, and V, the final battle. Remember V? Remember that Alien miniseries?
I do indeed.
But
We come in
like,
peace.
yeah, right, exactly. Again, you know, so I guess that my gateway was the entertainment industry. Maybe it's a little bit parallel to Meredith's story in that, you know, I always kind of joke that I was the cable guy, Jim Carrey. But like I
Yes,
chose
we've
like
got him on our show. I'm so happy.
right. But like, you know, I would watch a lot of TV, and a lot of that was science fiction. Like it was V, it was Knight Rider. I mean, it was Battlestar Galactica. It was the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman. Like all of this stuff that just one, what it did was it proved to me that, if we can imagine it, it can be possible, right? Like, we don't use 100% of our brains. I think not even maybe 10%. But the fact that we can imagine these things, these amazing worlds and universes and aliens and abilities, says to me that we can do it. It's possible. If our the small percentage that we're using can imagine it, then there's no reason it couldn't be a possibility. And we've seen that with Star Trek, and so, the 80s were very influential in terms of in the entertainment of the 80s, in solidifying for me that, man, anything's possible. So it kind of started there. The second piece that I think we all have in common, the storyteller piece. It's funny, Meredith, like when you were talking about, you know, being on TV in school. I think when like you said high school or something. Same. I was like the morning news guy, and I loved it for now. And not that I was popular, because I was not. I was in the middle range of like popularity, right? You had all the athletes, and then I was sort of in the middle because I played sports, but I was more of an academic. And my parents were very specific, like, you're going to be a doctor. So they told me that, and that was sort of my, and I, it's like, I look back, I'm not, clearly, and my wife reminds me that, because when we first met, I was going to be, but I love science. Like, it grounded me in loving, because I did calculus, and I did organic chemistry, and biological statistics and genetics. Like, I love all of that stuff. So now I'm combining all these things of like, okay, entertainment, what's real. I love storytelling, but then it was an identity thing too, because so my dad's from Argentina and my mom's from Kansas. And so I've always presented white, Midwest, always had, these great things. And it wasn't until, or privilege, I should say, and it wasn't until a few years ago when I started doing more kind of diversity and inclusion work, um, where I started to explore this other side of me, this sort of Latino side. And so now it became a conversation about identity. Like, who am I? And I think a lot of people, we all have multiple identities. We all have intersecting identities. And so all of these things are like culminating. And then, but space has always been there. That's why, or sci-fi for me, right? And the idea that that's possible. I mean, I grew up in the middle of Kansas on a lake where you could see all the stars. Like, it was always blew my mind when you left the city and that light pollution was gone, and you could see you could see everything, and I just wanted to be there. I just wanted to go on those adventures and, be on the Enterprise and whatever. Like, that just always drove me. So all those things are culminating. And at the same time, it's like building a confidence in me, I think, to the point where a few years ago now, I kind of took that step, and I was actually thrown into it. There was the Colorado Space Business Roundtable does their event every December. And so at the time, I'd started a company. So I kind of got into the entrepreneurship tech world, started a company, and my business partner, he was supposed to speak at this event. He was doing a talk on team selection and bias and sort of the process of hiring and picking teams and things like that. Well, the night before, he called me and said, "Hey man, I can't do it. Can you go?" So he's now throwing me in, which, by the way, I was like halfway through my public speaking at that, because I just get very intimidated, right? And imposter syndrome and things like that. But anyway, so I went, I pulled up my Yoda socks, and I said, you know what, I'm just going to go and do it in front of 200 rocket scientists. And so I did it, and I never looked back, and everybody was so welcoming. And that was sort of my first step. And then in the last year, I've really kind of just dove in, because I started to realize that anybody could be in space. Anybody. I mean, look, I'm not an engineer. I don't have clearance. Like I said, I'm just a kind of a sales and marketing guy who loves this stuff. But so there's room for all of us. That's what I started to learn. But then it's like most people don't get a voice, right? But I can give that, maybe I can be that I can use my privilege and my voice to hand the mic off to somebody else and say, here, use this platform, right? Like, I've built this thing, but not for me. Like, it's for everybody else. I want you to be able to tell your story. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now, is I want to create all of these avenues for other people to be able to come in and start talking about it. And because we all have that story. I think everybody on this planet has a looking up at the sky, stars, sci-fi, Star Trek, Star Wars story. And we, Meredith, you were talking about like making those connections. Like, we need to make those connections more prevalent, more mainstream, and show everybody that everybody else has those connections. Because I think that's a part of it too, is like sometimes you're made to feel like, well, that's a little weird that you're so into sci-fi. Oh, you're a Trekkie? Well, screw you. Like, no, like that's all good. And so how do we make those connections? So that's where for me, like, it's been this lifelong journey of understanding myself, and then, okay, now how can I use my powers for good, kind of, to your
And think of
responsibility.
movies like Back to the Future. That's not
Yeah,
a sci-fi movie, but if you thought a flying car was cool, you're kind of thinking space. I mean, it's little
totally.
things like that where you don't have to be all one way for sci-fi. You can find other cool things, like you said, like looking at the stars or flying space cars. And you have that in you, that you realize space is a real thing and we can be involved in however we want.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we all wish on a star, right? Like, we all do
That's true.
that.
I do every night.
Same. I mean, you can wish on 100,000 of them. You probably, you know exactly where they're coming down, right? Like, that's, I mean, how cool, right? To know that, then it becomes less luck and more sort of defining your own destiny, because now you're like, okay, there's a meteor shower. I'm going to go out with my kids and they can wish on 1,000 stars. Like, you start to, I think that's the power of this knowledge and this awareness that most people on this planet are missing, is it gives us the ability to start to define our own destiny. And it goes beyond Earth. It goes into the universe. I also believe that we're all connected energy, right? Like, I believe that we don't just die and go away. It's like energy. Our energy goes somewhere else in the cosmos, and maybe we're reborn, or I don't know, right? And that's evolution. We can talk about all of that, but I believe that everything's connected. I mean, you see it in plants, right, Dan? I mean, the Fibonacci sequence, I think, or everything's numbers, right? Like, and you can see those things in everything. So I don't know. Anyway, I love being here. Thank you all.
You also inspired me to think about Jiminy Cricket when I was a kid. And remember, they're like, everything your heart desires will come true.
Yes.
I mean, it's the same thing. And it doesn't
It
have to be
is.
a wish. Like you said, it can be making your destiny come true. But you don't
Yes.
think about that as a kid. You just look at Jiminy Cricket and Pinocchio and are like, oh my God, that's so cool. But now it's like, it all makes sense. Sorry, had to throw my little musical
Love
talent
it.
in there.
Love it.
At the Multiplanetary Society, we have a motto: forward is up.
Love it.
And that has all
Yes.
kinds of meanings we can unpack, but really I think about looking forward and looking up. And when you're talking about sci-fi, of course, that's near and dear to my heart. But I think it's something along the way gives somebody the understanding they have the possibility. And you talk about identity. My mother is from a Mexican family, my father's from an Irish family, and I grew up in foster homes, 12 different foster homes, different cultures, different ideas, different identities. And so when someone asks me what I am, it's like, what do I pull from?
Yeah.
And I've learned along the way that you have to parse your own identity, and I pull all the best pieces from all those different pieces. But I think something along the way inspires us. We see some sort of possibility, and we see ourselves in that possibility, and that's when the magic happens. Because I think there's those two pieces. It's like being inspired and knowing you have a pathway there, and that's why sci-fi is so powerful, because it's whether it's dystopian or it's utopian or anything in between, it does show possibilities. And I've met so many astronauts and scientists and other people in this industry that will tell me, oh, I saw Star Trek, or I saw Star Wars, or I met a scientist or an astronaut at my school one day, or one of my security officer at Multiplanetary Society, Mike Mansky, he was blind until he was 30 years old. He was born blind, and they did this revolutionary surgery. Yeah. And he did this revolutionary surgery, and he could see for the first time. And it was
Oh.
nighttime. He went out and he looked up and he was like, "What is that?" He'd never understood stars, and he saw the moon, and he was mystified by this thing. And it was that, coupled with meeting an astronaut as a child, and those two things just congealed for him. And he went, "I want this. I have to have this.
Wow.
It's got to be part of my life." And so he's dedicated his life to the Multiplanetary Society and to space, and making space accessible to the blind. And now I'm working with Mike Simmons on astronomy for the blind, which is just, to me, I never thought of the possibilities there. But I think it's that magical moment when you can see there is a possibility here. You're inspired, and you can get there. And that's one of the things I want to highlight in our show, is like all those different ways, because it just takes that one moment for somebody where they go, "I want that." And then it's a lifelong journey for sure. Growing up in foster care, I went from home to home to home. And oftentimes you see statistics about foster kids, like we end up in prison or on the streets or prostituting or ODing on drugs or suiciding. There's all these horrible statistics. And the longer a kid's in care, the more likely those things will unfold for them. So, foster kids are often just thrown away. And I think it is this lack of continuity largely that, destabilizes us. But for me, every time I moved to a new home, I had a tradition. I would go out the first night and I would look up and I would see the stars, and I would realize I'm still right here. Nothing's changed. I have this continuity. So for me, it was like always having this continuity above me, looking up and knowing, like, no matter where they shift me, my friends are there. I've got this. This is me. And it was that, coupled with finding this portal. I grew up in a very small town, and I didn't realize there was anything outside my bubble. I thought, this is, I have to fit into this really small town. And at 16, I was outed for being gay. So I was part of the National Honor Society, academic decathlon, future problem solvers. I was a great academic, and I was outed for being gay. And then parents, teachers, and students started making death threats against me. And the school went, "Oh, we're going to solve this for you." They moved me to a small school outside of town with 18 delinquents and a parole officer. And this was the school, like the last stop. These kids are incorrigible. We're going to toss them here and forget about them. There were no teachers. It was like, here's your books. Good luck,
Oh, wow.
And it was my first real understanding of, like, I don't belong here. There's no space for me. But that was coupled with my understanding that there was no other place to be, no other possibilities. So I kind of gave up until I found this box of National Geographics. And it was everything from 1960 to 1993. And I poured through it, and I saw like these amazing cultures and religions and tribes and dinosaurs and astronauts. And I was like, oh my God, there's this whole huge world. And that was my ticket out. I realized, like, there's stuff out there, and I'm going to get it. I'm going to go get that stuff. I'm going to get out of here. And but besides that box of National Geographics, I think I would have been, a suicide case, or I would have given up because I didn't see the possibility. So I didn't get into sci-fi until I'm known for working in the sci-fi industry, but that was way later, like my 20s. This box of magazines was like a golden ticket from Willy Wonka. It was like, here, kid, there's all this stuff you can do. Don't give up. So, that was my ticket. I think making those possibilities for kids especially is so, so important. So a lot of what I'm going to be focusing on for 2024 is creating opportunities for foster kids. So I'm creating this program called the Cosmic CASAs. And CASAs are court-appointed special advocates. Foster kids get these, like, retirees, basically, who will take them out on the weekends and mentor them. But what happens when those CASAs are us? What happens when it's Ubaldo or Meredith or Daniel or an astronaut? What happens when we take them out to Houston or to Kennedy Space Center or a tour of SpaceX? I think, we can inspire these kids at a very early age and start creating possibilities. So I want to talk to SpaceX and Axiom, Blue Origin, and others and say, what can you do? Can you make some scholarships for these kids? Because they're going to be your greatest workers when you give them these possibilities. So a lot of what I want to do this year is, creating those funnels for foster kids and the rest of the underserved communities out there. And, I think we can turn it from the streets to the stars. If we go from, you're on this track where you're supposed to fail, we're going to intercept that track and we're going to turn it around. And we're going to give you this big possibility.
I love it. Now we're doing New Year's resolutions, kind of to tie
Let's
this
do
whole
it.
like introduction
Yeah, right?
together.
Let's
Good
do
job.
it.
No, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, that's
all right.
and
Let's hear yours. I want to hear your New Year's resolutions.
Yeah,
as well.
yeah,
What's
go for it,
2024
Meredith.
look like for this crew?
So I'll jump next. Actually,
Let's do
less
it.
screen time for me. I've done like 20 proposals and various routes of funding and everything like that. And yeah, less screen time, more physical building. And because I've got this great team to help on some really exciting physical builds. So that's my 2024 is we're just building it. We're done trying to find the right marketing, the right investor pitch, the right market vertical. There's more heads down, more building. Get back to less screen time.
I love it as we're on the screen.
Yeah. So this
That's
is
good.
my
Yeah, we
exception.
definitely need
Right.
gotta get our hands dirty too. How can we get a camera out there to get you on screen while you're off screen? That's gonna be my goal.
I love it.
How about you, Meredith? What's 2024 look like for you? What are the big goals this year?
Well, now that I'm transitioning with my TV career, I'm actually writing a book right now that's going to
Oh,
be kind
wow.
of a
nice.
inspirational, but everything we talked about, kind of this first part of my life and how I got to where I am and how I overcame adversity and some of the ridiculous stories that I cannot make up that I've experienced in the TV world because I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. But to inspire people and give hope, I think that's the big thing is I was blessed with my life to be a public figure. And it's a privilege to be a public figure. It's, some people don't see it as that, but I always have. And it gives me a platform to make a difference and change lives. And now as an adult, I look back at my younger self and I want to be somebody that inspires that little girl. And I want to do that for our future generations now through my story and through my connection. So that's one big thing. And then the other thing is just really defining myself as Rocket Girl, being my true authentic self and continuing my work in the public field and helping tell more stories and just really be unapologetically me as a scientist and as a passionate space enthusiast as well. And working with organizations of all types, whether it's something like this, nonprofit, the private sector, the government, because you know what? Say what you want about every individual organization, but we're all on this planet together and we're all going to explore the other galaxies together. So I want to be a positive role model, locally, nationally, and hopefully internationally. And I'm really excited to see what we're going to accomplish. I hope people that are watching this right now are like, oh my God, I can't wait till the first episode because I know I'm excited. Ubaldo, now it's your turn.
Oh boy. I think for me, it's maybe it's really about, I think, solidifying my space identity in this community so that I can then, like you said, Meredith, like use that privilege to accomplish what we're all trying to accomplish here, which is really take this space conversation mainstream and make it a daily part of everybody's life. So that we can just fast track this. And, back to, the kids right now are the kids who are going to be working in space in 20, 30, 40 years. Like they're going to be living on the moon and headed to Mars. And, we need to better prepare people for that and kids for that, because they are literally the future of how this can takes us out to the next town over, the moon, and then to Mars and beyond. And so yeah, for that's sort of my goal is. And also, I work for this great company, two great companies. One is one I founded, and we're trying to help healthcare hire better. And that, to me, again, it's all tied, right? Like we need to be able to have better care, better quality of care, and that starts with people. And so first of all, how can what I do with that company, and then also I'm doing work for Sislinger Industries, and they're sort of like the forefront of foundries in space, like being able to, kind of what Daniel was talking about earlier, being able to take things in space and make things out of them and use them in space, right? Like we don't have to take it from here. It's so expensive, it's heavy and all that stuff. We can do it up there. And so now you've got this company that's on the forefront of making that possible in space, on the moon and beyond. And so I want people to hear those stories and know that this is still a very human centric endeavor. And how do we keep our humanity intact and still do this? Well, we need everybody. We need 8 billion plus people. We need all those voices to make sure that that happens, whether it's like here on Earth or in space. So that's sort of my goal, is just, just end this, like, doing this in a ton of different ways to make that happen.
Well, and can I set one for the group? I would
Yeah.
love to propose something. I think we should do an analog training together.
Oof.
So we should do a lock-in training at like MDRS or High Seas in Hawaii. Lock in and do an aeronautic crew training and an analog mission. I think that'd be phenomenal. We can take, we can video it. We can cover it, kind of like, I think it's, what is it, 3 weeks usually? 3 to 4 weeks. We can cover the entire journey behind the scenes in this lock-in. I think that'd be phenomenal. We could even do the one that they're setting up now at the Biodome in Tucson, which is a lot of fun, because they're now revamping that. Daniel knows a lot about that, and I've got a lot of friends working over there. So I don't know. What do you think, Daniel?
3 weeks is a big ask with my family situation. But I'm happy to do. I want to do like a space agricultural analog. So like, and that's a lot of my physical build focus for 2024 is exactly that. Is how do you have like a really deployable garden that can grow anywhere?
So Daniel's hosting. We're gonna go to his place.
Yeah, great. I mean,
I'll bring the plants. I'll
I know we'll eat well.
This is going to be so great, you guys, for 2024. And, I think we're kind of going to, I think there's so much more that's to come. So this first episode, like, kind of ending like this, is a good teaser. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have a good start here. Also, we should do this every year. I think at the end of next year, we should have a recap where we do this again,
a retrospective,
and talk about our coming year for sure.
Absolutely.
So
before we were able to accomplish, through our resolution, because we just set our resolutions. We're all like holding our pinkies. We all just set them for 2024. So a year from now, it'll be great to see how we all accomplish that next year.
Look back for sure. The look back at the Liftoff. So before we go, I would love to hear from each of you one show idea that you have for this year. Maybe it's like the greatest idea you've got, or one of the simple ones, but I'd love to hear one episode concept that you want to see play out this year. Can I start with you, Ubaldo?
Oh man, a million of them.
No pressure.
I mean, so one thing that I wanted to do is through our favorite actors' eyes, talk about what's really going on in the space industry, like the real things that are happening. Because we all love our Star Trek actors, our Star Wars actors, Expanse, whatever, right? All of our sci-fi, we all love them. And what really amazes me is how a lot of those actors don't really know what's happening in reality in the space industry, but they want to know. Like, they're always fascinated to know. And so to be able to present some of those real life ideas that are happening, like, Meredith, you reported on the DARPA Luna 10 capability study about building this collaborative architectural lunar infrastructure on the moon, using all these companies, big and small. Like, it would be so great to sit down with somebody from Star Trek or For All Mankind, right? Because they're actually doing that on TV right now, right? And they're showing what their imaginations have come up with based on reality. But wouldn't it be great to say, like, hey, this is what's actually happening? And by the way, you're a big inspiration for that. What do you think about that? And just to see that reaction, because I think we can also get a lot of people to a lot of just everyday people to come into this industry through those eyes, through that experience of someone they already look up to. So that's one idea. I can
bring the actors. Why don't we do, like, I'm thinking about a lot of in between segments. So besides our usual monthly show, what if we do it like lunch on the launch pad? And I can bring some of my actor friends. We could do a 30-minute segment with the actor. And I'm already thinking about a few of them that would be really down for it. But I love that idea, because it's like tying that inspiration with the doing. And it's funny, whenever the actors and the astronauts get together, they geek out over, no, you're cooler. No, you're cooler.
Right, exactly.
The whole thing is like, you've actually been to space, but you've been on TV, So it's, I think we can have some of those moments too, where maybe we bring together, like, an actor and an astronaut for 30 minutes to have lunch and eat on camera. And I want to break this taboo of, like, you can't eat on camera. You can eat on camera. I think having a lunch date on Zoom, totally fine. So maybe we do like lunch on the launch pad.
Ooh,
I was
love it.
thinking officer and a gentleman, astronaut and an actor,
I
like
love
the
it.
newest thing.
I love
I
it.
love it.
So Meredith, what is your idea for like a great show this coming year?
You know, I think just kind of tying both my passions in from the media background about space weather and Earth weather, NOAA satellites with weather forecasting, and the Space Weather Prediction Center and NASA on, kind of tying it together, talking about how they're different, but they're really not. They're same forecasting techniques because, I have an article, like I said, that's coming out about that, but I think it'd be kind of really cool to get like an expert with the science with Earth weather forecasting. I mean, I can add my background, but get somebody from like the NOAA space program about the weather satellites, and then also talk to them about what we're doing with those same weather satellites to help with space weather forecasting. Because believe it or not, weird fun fact, because I guess I'll have those every now and then. There are actually instruments on the GOES weather satellites that help with space weather forecasting, but you wouldn't know that.
Right.
So just fun little tidbits, I think, kind of combining Earth weather and space weather as one.
Love it.
I love that.
Yeah.
And we definitely need to have space weather segments by you.
Absolutely. Like that's
We'll get me a green screen and I can present and do my like TV green screen magic. I have to keep my pointing in check, right?
We have a
I mean,
KP7, the proton flux is up, and the
Yeah.
magnetism from the sun. Yeah, it's gonna be great. I love it.
I mean, that could even be a weekly thing, right? Like it, obviously we could do like a big part of it,
Yeah.
big segment during the monthly show or whatever, but like you could do a weekly thing on the
That would
site.
be fun.
That would be amazing.
Well, I think you're gonna do some street science for us, aren't you, as well?
Oh yeah.
I think we were talking about that.
Meredith
Yeah,
on the
kind of
move.
Meredith on the move.
Yes.
Rocket Girl
Yeah.
reporting at its finest. I need
Yes.
to brand that.
Yeah, you should do. Daniel, what about you? I think I'd love to hear from you now about
Yes.
what episode you'd like to see come in this coming year.
Yeah, I'd love to do one where we bring in some subject matter experts from industries that aren't specifically aligned with space, but they're real
Mhm.
space geeks, as I've run into a lot of them along the way. So that's something that I'd love to do, and have a Q&A with them, say, hey, what about this? How do we solve for this? And have these folks weigh in on their piece of the puzzle and
I love
how
it.
they see it kind of
Yeah.
fitting in. So,
Daniel, and I
definitely
have somebody, sorry to interrupt, but this is how I think. I have a friend of mine who is like an expert on plants and he's a TV meteorologist. So it'd be cool to bring him on that episode and kind of get the
Yeah.
perspective and maybe get him to start doing space plant talks. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I'm
Sorry
almost
to
seeing-
interrupt.
Sounds good.
I'm seeing like, the Tonight Show, like Johnny Carson, or like that's the segment is where Steve Irwin comes on with or remember the guy who came out from the zoo with the different animals
Oh,
all the
yeah.
time? Like
The animals that
that's
would
where I'm
climb on
seeing
people and
yeah, like that's what I'm seeing is like Daniel kind of hosting these different people and they're bringing things on and showing, like you can almost feel it, right? Like that would be amazing.
maybe guests in the garden or something.
Woo,
Yes,
girl, I like that.
yes. Daniel's
Well, I'm going to
garden.
say it. Sex and space. I work with Spaceborne
Yes.
United.
That's right.
Sex and reproduction. We don't talk about it enough, but really,
No.
it's another one of these big pieces. I had the same moment with Spaceborne United years ago when I first came on the team there, where I was like, ugh, you guys. And then I realized if we go to space and can't create more humans, that's no good. That's not a long-term solution. So what they're doing is, when they're talking about in vitro in space, they're revolutionizing the way that we do in vitro on Earth. So they're actually creating higher levels of technology for that field by focusing on space. Earth is benefiting. So I want to cover sex and space with Spaceborne. I have a few really cool guests in mind. And I think that's a topic we can break the taboo on. And then people realize like, oh, you can do normal things in space. You can reproduce in space. And that's just so vital because besides eating, we need to create more humans. Otherwise, we've got a limited supply.
That's great. I love that because that's exactly it. I mean, just because we're on the moon does not mean we're not going to be human on the moon. I mean, there will be a bar on the moon. You put up a moon village. It's either going to be a sanctioned, really cool, like pre-thought out, pre-architectured bar, or it's going to be down, in the basement with illegal alcohol being, created and distributed.
Chris Carberry will tell you all about that.
Yeah, so it's like we might as well think about it and know that it's going to happen, whether we like to think it's not or it is or it's not. It's going to happen. Sex in space. It's going to happen. We are
This
human.
sounds like a talk show now, even more and more. We're doing a great job, guys.
I know.
Well, and I think that also, when we talk about sex in space, I don't know if you've heard the story, but they sent Sally Ride up to space, and they sent her with 100 tampons. I think she was going for like a week or something, and they were like, or a month, and they're like, is this going to be enough? And they had no clue. And so there's also a lot of equity conversations we can have around this.
Yes.
There was this situation where in the 90s they decided they were going to make a hard decision, and they were going to average their spacesuits. So they averaged them, but they averaged them for men. So in the 1990s they did this, and then just recently, a few years back, when they were going to have an all-female spacewalk, they had to cancel it because they didn't have spacesuits that fit.
Yep.
And this is the same problem the Mercury 13 dealt with. I forget what her name was, but one of the ones I spoke to, she said they were saying, oh, we can't send women to space because, spacesuits just won't work for women. And she's like, what do you think we are, badgers? You can make this work for us. So not just sex and reproduction, but sex in the sense of like women and men in space, and the fact that we need to start looking at including people more, instead of just saying, well, you can be there and we're going to plan this all-female spacewalk, but you actually have to have what we need to make that happen, which means that women had to have been factored in a big way and not averaged out. So I definitely want to hit on some of those harder topics too. I think we'll have levity, but we also need to dig into some of those missing pieces, as we go.
If somebody was not interested in our show now, they should definitely be watching.
Yes, tune
January.
in. Well, so real quick, the first episode that we're going to record, we're talking about the wrong stuff, right? Like, so Meredith mentioned that. I think in this context and how we're going to approach it is, we've always heard about the right stuff. Like, you need to have the right stuff. And what we've ended up doing is turning all these astronauts into gods. And that's the wrong message. We need people to know that, you know what, like, the wrong stuff is needed too. Like, we need everybody. And so I think that's what our first episode is going to cover. And so look for that in January.
And there's a lot of misinformation out there. So we want to make sure what the wrong stuff looks like and differentiate that as well from the right stuff. Because like we talked earlier, you have to get the facts, and then you can decide what you want from the facts, but we have to stick to the facts and let people make their own decisions.
Well, and absolutely, we want to make sure people know we want the wrong stuff. Now is a generation where all the wrong stuff is the right stuff. And if you can do anything, if you're a plumber, if you're a welder, if you're an artist, all of that was the wrong stuff in the Apollo era, but it's what we need. We need all of that because we're building 100%. A space civilization now. And I think that's going to be the exciting part.
Yeah. Oh, can't wait.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
How do we feel?
Thank you all.
First one in the can.
Yeah, this is really exciting. Yeah, I mean, I never thought this would have been possible again. Like, even a couple months ago, something I was dreaming, and then I met Inara, and Inara just has this ability of doing, which is really freaking fantastic.
Ooh, nice background.
I want to show you this really quick because I got a surprise for all of you. So I have a cartoonist who does these for me. This was me before COVID. So he does these little cartoons for my shows. I want to create one with the four of us as like comic book characters. So I was thinking like Meredith, I would put you as the Rocket Girl, and you would have a tornado body basically swirling underneath.
Oh yeah,
doing the weather. And then Ubaldo, I want to see you as like maybe a half robotic space builder, like building in the background. Yes. And then Daniel, for you, I want to see like vines and the green thumb aspect. So we can go over those details, but I want to do a little promo for us where we have these like comic book superhero kind of look.
I love it.
What do you think?
Done.
Stan Lee would be proud.
Oh, so much to look forward to.
Well, I guess this is it. We're good. This is the start. Look for more. We're going to do, not only once a month shows, but we're also going to bring you lots of segments in between, lots of cool content. We're all going to be on the road at different times. So we're going to be giving you behind the scenes as we go to space conferences and journalism events and maybe the White House. We'll see, but follow us along. We're going to be doing some fun stuff.
Absolutely.
And just know that all of us, we're doing this. And then the cool thing is we have everyday daily jobs too. So you're going to get to see people that have full-time jobs that are still putting their passions into something like this to bring it to you.
Ooh, great point. Good stuff. All right. Well, so that's us signing off. Should we have some sort of, we need like a punch the screen together or something?
Yeah, what do we do? That's a good question. I'm just like,
I like
my
it.
default.
You could do you. I do my little wave at the end of my newscast.
There you go.
The sign. We'll just do our own thing.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Daniel,
keep
what's
looking
yours? I'm waiting for that. Daniel, I'm like,
I'll do. So I recently did this at a pitch competition. It was
ooh,
breathe life into space in sign language. So it was
Ooh.
breathe life, which I love
breathe.
because it's like growing, like a plant growing, and then into, and then space is this backwards hand, like look up. So
Oh
that's my breathe
yeah.
life. That's how we ended a pitch. We didn't get the money,
Breathe
but
life
Oh, I
breathe
love it.
life into space.
into
Basically
space.
utilizing carbon
Oh,
dioxide in the loop, in the green loop.
that's amazing. I love it.